Hello and welcome. It is, of course, time for the news. This is Basils Imperial News Network. Welcome. I am your host, Casimir Basilius, here to bring you the latest galactic news of GSACG1. Now, without further delay, the news. Let's start this main news story of the broadcast. So, the Deep Frontier sector of South 308 West 253, known locally as Sacred Grove, has formed a coalition of several larger nations in the Dyson Swarm, along with their core government, against the increasing presence and influence of the Central Nations. The Central Nations are what we often here call civilized space. Anyway, this has caused some disagreement within Sacred Grove, as some of the stations and alliances of the Dyson Swarm believe that trade, access, and partnerships with the Central Nations can lead to a golden age of both trade and influence of the Sacred Grove sector. Those opposed believe that dealings with the Central Nations should be controlled by the Sacred Grove core government and not the individual nations of the Dyson Swarm, fearing that the Central Nations might gain a foothold in Sacred Grove and degrade the overall influence of the core government, and may even draw the Dyson Swarm and the sector into the Second Galactic War. Let's get an analysis on this. The Sacred Grove sector is a deep frontier sector with no currently known FTL route to it, specifically using normal FTL routes. Access to the sector is, of course, through an ancient FTL gate that leads from a system in the close southern frontier of civilized space directly to the capital system Dyson Swarm of Sacred Grove. Now, this isn't in my news script, but I would like to point out that the ancient FTL gate is, while technically ancient technology, not necessarily classified as illegal technology from the Empire perspective. We are going a bit off script with this, but so basically, the Empire has certain restrictions on ancient technologies. Now, assuming that modern nations don't try and disassemble the gates or learn anything about the gates, the Empire has no concern about the existence of these ancient gates. Of course, reverse engineering such technology is still considered highly illegal, and the Empire will send task forces to deal with such things. Now, back to our regularly scheduled news. Due to the fact that the access is through the one gate, it is seen by the Central Nations, that southern sector is seen by the, and Sacred Grove itself, is seen as a gateway into the deep frontier. Sacred Grove and that southern sector, to be specific. Now, as for Sacred Grove itself, it is one of the few neutral systems in the southern galactic frontier that is both as developed as a major nation core system and has a jump gate that links to the main jump gate network through the ancient gate, of course. Their government, that being the government of the Sacred Grove, is run by a unified collection of Dyson Swarm nations and the capital system's main world. there is, of course, if it's unclear, one main Dyson swarm we're talking about. There are several lesser partial Dyson swarms, but when we say Dyson swarm nations, we do specifically mean the sub-nations of the main Dyson swarm. It's not a unified collection, as you'll see. The government is run by a small collection of those nations and the capital system's main world. They oversee the security of all of the colonized worlds of the sector and have influence reaching into bordering sectors. Sacred Grove, however, as a whole, is not a unified force. The colonies, in their rings of influence, act as semi-independent nations under the protection of the Sacred Grove government. Many of these nations in the Dyson Swarm itself and the outer rings of influence do not acknowledge the leadership of the Sacred Grove, and nations directly outside the borders have come into political and light military conflict with them as the Sacred Grove expands its influence and colony borders. Now, for some galactic politics. The Terran nations, once more, slightly off script, that's where our Solo Sunday campaigns take place. So far, the ones with Yelena Aldis are in the Terran nations. Anyway, back to our news script. The Terran nations have once again attempted to unify due to the system's authority threat. However, this time they have achieved limited success through an arrangement of military support between the various sub-nations. The sub-nations have refused any form of direct alliance or greater unification. Some of the sub-nations have, however, entertained the thought of working more directly with the Allied Central Nations, or ASEAN. Next, some news on the Second Galactic War. The war continues in its 11th year with little sight in end. Let us take a look at the system's authority, or SA. The Council Militarist Party, the main core of the system's authority, maintains its strength due to the sheer amount of worlds under its control. The Commonwealth government has, however, officially withdrawn from the system's authority. And the Enster seem to have moved to achieving their own goals, but have, lost track of where I was here. And the Enster have moved to achieving their own goals, but have not made any official statements regarding their status in the system's authority. The lesser rebel forces and regimes in the Central Nation territories remain supportive of the system's authority as they rely on support and supply from the main system's authority government. This is a bit off, not really off topic. Once more, this is off script. A bit of an explanation that we didn't write into the script, but I might as well give it here as we're doing this live. Of course, the script is up to date. It is for this past galactic week. But, of course, it's gathered and researched by our team of conscripts. Anyway, as for our little off-topic, off-script segment, the lesser regimes in the Central Nation territories are there because the system's authority's main method of conflict in the Second Galactic War heavily relies on drawing other forces to assist them. They act through a series of coups and forming political parties within other nations to act on their regard, as opposed to they themselves directly initiating conflict with, well, they do initiate conflict with other nations. They may mainly use forces within those nations themselves as their forces. Anyway, back to our script. Now, for a look at the Allied Central Nations, the ASEAN alliance is smaller than the Systems Authority and is structured that each nation provides support to each member territory while maintaining their own fronts. The ASEAN alliance remains strong in its goal despite the vast difference in the number of systems the Systems Authority has compared to them. And a quick look at the Galactic Council. The Council, of course, remains shattered into its former states, despite attempts from the capital to reform the organization. While aligned with the Allied Central Nations against the Systems Authority, they receive little support due to long-standing animosity between many ASEAN nations and the Council. Once more, off script here, the Council and the ASEAN have had long-standing disagreements. The ASEAN, we didn't really have an off-script segment on the, I say segment, we didn't really just ramble off script about the Allied Central Nations, but they're very loosely unified. The ASEAN, that is. The Galactic Council and the ASEAN nations have had a lot of conflicts in the past, before the ASEAN was the ASEAN. For instance, the ASEAN is made up of, well, the Federation of Allied Nations, the insectoids. I didn't really, we're off script here. I don't have a list in front of me of the nations. I would have to bring up a file real fast. My apologies. We'll see if we can't do that in a timely manner. Of course, when I say we're off script, I do mean we've basically shifted from what our good researching conscripts have given us. Which means, you know, things are a bit slow if we want to look up data. And well, there's nothing prepared for this. Where is it? Here we are. So, the Allied Central Nations consists of various nations. Obviously, the Federation of Allied Nations, as I mentioned. The Orbs, the Terran nations of Altor, the Alliance, the Zeros Consortium, the nations of the Corelette Pact, the New Alliance of Light, loosely, not really the nations of the Terrans breakaway. Not really. They provide very much just supply support as opposed to real support. Same with the Terran nations, even though they're on the same side for the most part. Anyway, back to our script. Yes, well, no, we're still off script here. The Council has had wars with the Federation of Allied Nations, the Insectoids, and a lot of those other factions, and so they're not on the best of terms. Now, back to our script. And where do we land? But on our sponsor segment. And now for our sponsor. Today's sponsor is the Celestial Aether Forges. Based out of the Federation of Allied Nations, or FOAN, the Celestial Aether Forges are a ship manufacturer of unparalleled quality. They produce not only some of the fastest ships in the Central Nations, but each ship is individually crafted to be a work of art worthy of royalty. Celestial Aether Forges ships generally have slightly higher crew requirements, are slightly smaller than their counterparts, and have a bit less armoring and shielding. However, they have improved maneuverability and speed, used galaxy-wide as racing ships and the ships of the rich and famous. The Celestial Aether Forges ships are built to order and custom designed to meet the needs of anyone seeking an opulent addition to their personal fleet. That ends our sponsor segment. Now, for commerce and economy. We have seen a shift in the smaller megacorporations as they attempt to gain ground in the galactic scene. The conflict, well, a recent conflict between Omnicorp and Point Combat Templates, which was our previous sponsor of our first news segment. Over several systems has opened up opportunities as both of these top megacorps contract out to smaller corps. We are, however, not seeing a loss in availability of their products, as these conflicts are considered exceptionally small to both Omnicorp and Point Combat Templates, both of which are in the top 10 megacorporations of the galaxy. In other economic news, former Council territory nations have begun investing heavily in the construction of new, long-distance FTL gates. Now that the nations are no longer part of the Galactic Council, the old alliances and animosities arise anew, and the old interconnected FTL web of the former council no longer meets the security, political, trade, and travel needs of those nations. And, well, once more, off script, as those deals of FTL gate construction ranges in the hundreds of credit units, if not 500,000 or more credit units for these gate networks, for any individual gate network, depending on the distance and scale of the network. And then the additional hiring of fleets to scout the networks out and all that. We are looking at a credit unit being 10 billion credits. So when we say 5,000 credit units, we're talking about 50 trillion for a single gate network, to as the minimum of 1 trillion for a gate network, if I'm doing my math right. We are looking at large-scale economic investment into these new gate networks. Now, let's close off our broadcast with a small local story. Several salvage workers in the debris field from the most recent Galactic War have found a fully intact Federation of Allied Nations troop transport, reports indicating the vessel had taken several hits from its previous engagement that destabilized its FTL shielding. When the vessel tried to move to the system it was found in, the shielding failed, exposing the entire crew to FTL. Unfortunately, for the crew of the vessel and its passengers, this proved to be lethal, as exposure to FTL often tends to be. However, this rare failure of FTL shielding has become a boon for the salvage workers, which This find is worth approximately 70 million Galactic Standard credits on the market for the ship itself, counting used ship prices and slight damage. And that's not including the military supplies it was carrying. The independent salvage workers are currently seeking a buyer and are expecting a significantly lower return even than the 70 million Galactic Standard credits and additional price of supplies that it was carrying, given the lack of legality of the operation and the claims by the Federation of Allied Nations for the return of the vessel. That concludes our small local news story. And that also concludes this news broadcast. Basils Imperial News Network for all your galactic news of GSACG1. We hope you have a good day.